Welcome to Net Positive, where we help you to transform your eco-anxiety into action through regeneration and resilience. And today's a special episode. I'm very excited to be back with Juliet Grable, who is a renowned artist, writer, and author who's based here in the Pacific Northwest, but has work that spans the globe. And today we're talking about her newest project, which I'm very excited to chat with Juliet. And thank you so much for joining me here today.
Thanks so much for having me. It's a real pleasure to be back.
It's always a fun time talking to you. You've got such a depth of knowledge, particularly around the built environment. And I'd love to learn more about your newest project. Tell me.
Sure. My newest project is a book. It's called The Living Museum, Celebrating Nature and Modeling Resilience at Selby Botanical Gardens. And it's a project that's really dear to my heart.
Where is this project located?
So Selby Botanical Gardens is located in Sarasota, Florida, on 15 acres on a peninsula in Sarasota Bay. It is a beloved botanical gardens and institution. It's really important not only for the community of Sarasota and the state of Florida, but actually it has a globally significant collection of epiphytes, which are also known as air plants.
Right.
And it's a really important research institution too. Selby's botanists have gone all over the world, mostly to South America, collecting rare plants. And so it's very important for the conservation of these rare plants.
Tell me more about this place. What was it before and what is it transformed into?
Sure. So originally the gardens was 7 acres that were bequeathed by a widow named Marie Selby. She and her husband lived on this peninsula for decades. She outlived her husband. They were both big philanthropists in the area, and they gave to a lot of local institutions, and they especially supported education and the lifting up of young people. And she was a passionate gardener herself. And so when she died, she bequeathed these 7 acres really for the benefit of the public, to be enjoyed by all, and she wanted them to be preserved. And so a group of people got together to discuss how best to honor her legacy, and they created these botanical gardens, and they decided, after looking into it, to focus on epiphytes because there was no botanical gardens in the world with such a focus.
Really?
That's right. Yeah. So over the decades, it became a really beloved place for the community. As the city of Sarasota grew around it, it was this really visionary green space right next to downtown. And so it's a beloved place for children and families to come, has a really strong community of volunteers. And then, of course, there's also this really important research going on that has attracted scientists from around the world. So all this was going on over the decades, but the place was really outgrowing itself. There were more visitors coming than could be accommodated by the current infrastructure. And leadership also recognized that this is a really vulnerable site. As beautiful as it is, being right on the bay, it's also vulnerable to hurricanes and storm surge, especially as climate change is accelerating these types of events. So at the same time, they realized that to keep being profitable, they needed to kind of change their model. And so they created and branded, they call the Living Museum, which is they created this rotating schedule of immersive exhibitions where they paired art and culture and nature in this really compelling way, creating these immersive exhibits featuring artists ranging from George Harrison to Tiffany to Chagall. So anyway, that was all working really well, but the infrastructure at the gardens was aging. The greenhouses that housed some of the living collection were built in the 70s with just plain old glass. The priceless herbarium, like dried specimen collection, was being housed in residential buildings that are kind of scattered across the site. These preserved specimens in liquid called spirits, same thing. There was just no real dedicated safe place for them. They knew it was only a matter of time because we're really going to be, subject to damage if they weren't better protected. So they wanted to solve all of this with a new project. And so they initiated a master planning process that resulted in a 3-phase master plan. And this book is about the first phase of that master plan that was completed in 2024.
Oh, wow, that seems like a long legacy of history there, particularly community focused, as you've mentioned.
Yeah, the Marie Selby Gardens has become a really important place for the community. There's all sorts of annual traditions, like around the holidays, they decorate the campus with lights and people come and enjoy the light. And the exhibitions are really popular. They have a lot of programming for children, both in the summer and throughout the school year. There's hundreds of volunteers that consider the gardens their home, a lot of retirees that have really found almost second careers working there at the gardens. So it's a really important place for the community. And like I mentioned, it's very centrally located.
Describe more about the place itself and the facilities on site. You've mentioned there's some art, I would imagine, in a gallery type of setting. And you've also mentioned a botanical garden here too. But tell me some of the other functions that happen there on the site.
Sure. And shall I tell you about it as it is now?
Or tell me also maybe how it has progressed through time. Is this final form where it started?
Sure. No, it's changed quite a lot. And so the cool thing about the redesign of the campus is that it's actually expanded open space and garden space significantly. So the design preserves some historic buildings, including the Selby's house and also another residential structure called the Payne Mansion, which
Mm-hmm.
has been used as a museum now for quite some time. So it preserved those structures, but it really consolidated a lot of the functioning for staff and administration and running of the gardens into a tighter footprint. And so basically, three new buildings were created. There's a parking structure, because before parking was kind of just scattered across one side of the site, and it wasn't very cohesive or coherent. It was hard for visitors to understand where to go and park. This way, there's a parking structure right at the entrance. It's a lot more efficient. There's 4 stories of parking, and then the top of that structure is capped with an enormous solar array. And by the way, the parking structure is also covered in plants. We'll talk more about that in a minute. So that's one building. The second building is the Welcome Center, which is like an open air pavilion supported by these really compelling structures that emulate trees. Again, I'll talk more about that in a minute, but that's where people come either from the street or from the parking structure, buy their ticket, and from there they can enter the gardens. And then adjacent that Welcome Center is a new building called the Plant Research Center. That's a 2-story building, and it houses quite a few things. On the first ground floor, there's an open office for most of the staff. There's also a dedicated space for volunteers, which they didn't have before. So a break room and place to put their things and stuff like that. There's also a theater where visitors can come and watch an orientation video. And then there's some other behind the scenes stuff downstairs. And then upstairs, there's administration, and there's the research lab, there's the library, and there's the herbarium and the spirit collection. Well, all of those priceless collections are up on the second floor where they're going to be safe from storm surge. And the laboratory is now a state-of-the-art facility with proper lighting and fans and surfaces and everything they need. Whereas before, it was really kind of an ad hoc situation. So just a lot of improvements for everyone.
Wow, this sounds amazing. So not only a botanical garden, but you've mentioned a laboratory. I can imagine botanists there propagating plants. The library, and there's not just typical books. I saw in some of the photos in the books in your book that there are certainly hardbound texts of plants and horticulture, but is the library limited to just books?
It's mostly books and botanical plates, but some of them date back to the 17th century and even earlier. And so, as you can imagine, like these are very rare books that you're not going to find anywhere else. And the cool thing is anyone can go and see them.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah. So I think you have to sign up or something like that, but it's not restricted. You can go in and enjoy these books as a member of the public.
Wow, that's pretty amazing, particularly for that type of access to historical documents and texts. about the practice of horticulture over the years, over the decades, over the centuries. And
Mhm.
it sounds like a really good chance to have a unique experience there for both visitors and staff and volunteers.
Absolutely, and that was really one of the main things they were trying to accomplish with this reimagined campus is they wanted to make the research, the important research that's happening there more visible to the public because before it was really cut off. The visitors would come and enjoy the gardens, but they really weren't aware or couldn't see the research that was going on there. So this way it's just a lot more connected. In fact, I would say connection is a big theme of this project.
And connection's very important. And so I'd like to ask you more about the importance of this place and why it's so necessary.
Sure. Well, I think as we become more urbanized and more connected to digital devices, it's ever more important to remember to connect to the natural world and to take time to do that. And so a place like Marie Selby Gardens offers that chance, and you don't have to go far outside the city to do it. You can just enter this oasis right in the middle of the city, and almost instantly, when you step into that campus, you feel the difference. There
Hmm.
are plants everywhere. It's beautiful. It's a sensory experience of sights, smells, and sounds and textures. And you can just feel your body instantly relax as soon as you enter that space.
Describe more about that sensory experience for visitors.
Sure. Well, whether you're entering through the parking structure or walking in, the first thing you're going to notice is plants everywhere. And when I say everywhere, I mean even on the buildings. There's vines on all four facades of the parking structure. There's a large botanical wall right at the entry of the Plant Research Center. And then when you enter the Welcome Center to buy a ticket, there are epiphytes or air plants hanging off of these tree-like structures. So you feel like you're in a forest even when you're in this built space. And then from that welcome center, you can go out into the gardens. There are many different kinds of gardens to experience. One of the first you'll see is a children's rainforest garden, which not to play in because there's all these treehouse structures built into the trees. And then there's these magnificent trees that have these roots that just are exposed on the surface and they're just irresistible to kids. The time I was there, I never did not see a kid playing amongst those roots.
That.
And then, like I said, there's 15 acres to explore. So you can go all the way out to the tip of the peninsula and there's an intact mangrove forest right there on the coastline. Mangroves are incredibly important
Hmm.
for those coastal ecosystems in Florida. They provide habitat for all kinds of creatures. They also buffer the land from storm surge. They're completely adapted to live submerged in salt water, part or all of the times. They're really remarkable plants. And so that was another important piece of this project was to preserve that forest. And then there's a conservatory with all kinds of specimens growing inside the glass structure. There's a bonsai garden. There's a succulent garden. It's almost endless. And then if you look closely, you'll see epiphytes everywhere, hanging off of tree limbs, blooming in unexpected places. Orchids are epiphytes.
Hmm.
So if you like orchids, it's definitely worth a visit. Just some of the most luscious colors you'll ever see, and just an endless variety of textures and shapes to explore. So whether you're a kid or an adult, it's a wonderful place to explore. And then depending on the exhibition that's up, it's paired so beautifully with the nature, with the natural world in this often surprising ways that it's really stimulating, yet at the same time, a place where you just feel your body let go a little bit because you're reconnecting with that part of yourself that's just needs to have contact with the natural world.
And in thumbing through the photos, such beautiful photography in the book, I can imagine with childlike wonder at any age how fun it must be to explore and find hidden spaces and experience some flora and fauna. throughout the gardens and in the spaces. Was that some of the experience that you saw? A variety of different ages interacting and playing and experiencing together?
Yeah, absolutely. And what I think is wonderful about a botanical gardens, and especially one like this that's so thoughtfully designed, where the structures are so beautifully integrated into the more natural parts of the gardens, is there are all kinds of levels at which you can experience it. So if you're a kid, you can just follow your curiosity and explore the different wonderful plants that you've probably never seen before. Maybe you have a more scientific mind and you start to wonder more about these plants and where they come from. And then you can start to get into the conservation aspects of some very rare plants. If you're more inclined, more interested in art or culture, there's something for you there. So I think there's the interpretive signage at the campus is really good, really beautifully done. And there's interpretive signage talking about the different design elements and how they were conceived. So if it's a really beautiful way to learn where, you don't feel like it's being shoved down your throat. You can take it or leave it. You can just simply enjoy being there, or you can delve more deeply into some aspect of the design, which does bring me to want to mention that this whole project, this phase 1 project, the 3 buildings that I described, were driven by biomimetic and biophilic design.
Well, tell
And
me more.
well, it was really a natural fit in a lot of ways. Being a botanical gardens, there's inspiration from nature all around you. But the design team really took that seriously. They really looked at these air plants. And what's remarkable about them is they don't need soil to thrive.
Mm-hmm.
They take in everything they need from the environment immediately around them, the sunlight, the air, the moisture in the air, the nutrients that maybe fall petals or leaves or on the structures that they're growing on. So they grow on other plants. They grow on tree limbs or the stems of plants, but they're not taking away from them. They're not harming them in any way. In some cases, they're creating habitat for insects and other creatures. So it's a really beautiful metaphor when you think about it for a building, right? It's this structure that's not harming the land, that's enjoying this almost symbiotic relationship with the place. And so that's what the design team had in mind when they designed these structures. And so you can really see that beautifully in the Welcome Center with these tree-like steel structures that have a main trunk and then 4 branches that come off and support the roof. And they look like trees. And then in the canopy of that ceiling, there's even skylights with a diamond pattern cut out of them so that sunlight filters through the
It makes a
canopy.
pattern on the floor.
Yeah, it makes a pattern on the floor that's constantly changing throughout the day as the sun's angle changes. And then they're constantly rotating too the plants that are hanging off of these structures. So every time you go, it's a new experience, which I think is quite beautiful. There's a wonderful thing that the landscape architects did that's subtle. If you're not looking for it, you may just kind of feel it. But they created these different landscapes that emulate the natural landscapes of Florida.
Okay.
Yeah, so as you move from the higher part of the site down toward the shore, you move from this oak hammock ecosystem down to the glades, which are these grasses which naturally filter stormwater. And then you move down eventually to the mangroves that I talked about earlier. So again, it's like teaching, instructing without hammering you over the head. Take it or leave it.
And something I learned while reading through the book was how the concepts of strength and beauty play into the design. Would you tell me more?
Sure. Again, this is a really challenging place to build. Not only do you have the threat of storm surge and these hurricane force winds, but you also have a really corrosive salt air environment. And so all the materials, especially the exterior materials, had to be selected with that in mind. But yet they also wanted them to be beautiful and to reflect that environment. And so they chose this natural stone for the facade, which is just gorgeous. And it is imprinted with shells. And so it really evokes the geology of the marine ecosystem. And it's also this really warm color. which
Mhm.
reflects sunlight, which is very good in this hot, humid environment. You don't want to be absorbing heat, you want to be reflecting heat. And then the buildings are concrete, and so they're really strong and durable. And it's a tried and true construction method there in Florida in the high zone. And so, again, durable yet beautiful. Something else I haven't talked about yet is that the color of the stone evokes the Sarasota School of Design, which is a really fascinating movement that happened in the mid 20th century, where this group of architects in Sarasota started looking at influences like Bauhaus, and they created a new architecture, a new vernacular just for that area that emphasized light materials, deep overhangs to protect buildings and occupants from that harsh sun, connection with nature with lots of natural landscaping, open plans that encourage natural ventilation for cooling.
Mm.
And so the design team really wanted to give a nod to that Sarasota school. And so they did that in, I think, in a really subtle but beautiful way. So like a lot of storytelling in the
Mm,
buildings,
mhm.
just through the materials they selected and the way they designed the buildings. And then of course, the way they use plants to just drape them and connect them with the landscape.
And there's a lot of visual treats for the eye. Could you tell me more about some of the other senses that you can experience there?
Sure. Well, there's a beautiful lily pond that's really become like a central feature that draws a lot of people. People just can't seem to not stop there.
Mm.
And so there's some trickling water that you can hear.
Okay.
And then of course just, insects buzzing and then
Mhm,
the
mhm.
wind.
Dragonflies.
Dragonflies, birds,
Birds.
wind
Yes, yes, I can
breeze,
imagine.
and then, of course, as you get closer to the water, just the sound of the water.
The
So
smell of
the
salt air,
smell, yeah,
mud.
then all the
Mm,
plants, all kinds of
mhm.
smells. So it's a full-on sensory.
I can imagine so. I can vision this in my mind. You've mentioned the aspect of storytelling, and I'd like to learn about some of the stories that you've experienced as you wrote.
Sure. Well, there's so many, but one that I really love to tell is that this project was designed with resilience in mind, again, given that it's in this really vulnerable site.
Mm.
And it was tested almost immediately. So I think the official opening was in June of 2024.
Okay.
Later that summer, in August, they were hit with a hurricane. It wasn't a direct hit, but there was a tremendous storm surge.
Mhm,
And then
mm,
I think
mhm.
not 2 weeks later, Hurricane Milton came and it was a direct hit. And it was a pretty devastating storm. But the new buildings and infrastructure performed beautifully. The storm surge stripped vegetation. I can't remember how far inland, but there was just this swath of bare earth. Boats were washed onto the shore, trees were toppled. The storm did damage some of the perimeter solar panels on
Mhm.
that big array on the parking structure. Some of those panels ended up tumbling around and damaging some of the interior panels. But other than that, there was no damage to the buildings,
Mm, mhm.
including the tree-like welcome center. So that was a real sigh of a relief for the design team to see that the buildings they designed performed as they expected.
I can imagine there's maybe a metaphor here of growth through disaster, or after disaster, there becomes growth. Do you think that that was something that they found on site after particularly these back-to-back hurricanes? I'm sure there was some damage to the site, but tell me about the rebounding of the plants and the place after these. You've mentioned here some of the structure was damaged, but tell me a little more, if you could, about what the aftermath looked like.
Well, I wish I'd seen it. I've seen a few pictures and I've gotten descriptions from some of the staff and some of the design team. So I know that like it looked really bad.
Mm,
Again, mostly because of the bare earth that all this vegetation was stripped away closest to the shore.
mm,
But
mm.
the cool thing is everyone pitched in to clean up. Like a lot of the volunteers came. And they reopened pretty darn quickly. I want to say within 2
Oh,
weeks.
wow.
And they felt that was really important to,
Mm-hmm.
be able to be open for the community, especially since other structures in the city were damaged. They
Mm-hmm.
really wanted to be able to provide that. I think they rebounded really quickly. The collections were not damaged, which was a huge goal of the project. So I think in that way it performed beautifully. I think it was really resilience in action.
Sounds like it. And it sounds like, too, there's a lot of precious things to protect here, not only in the land, but the texts, the plants. There's, I can imagine, a good bit of antiquity and rarity amongst this collection that's very important to preserve.
Absolutely. And I should mention that phase 2 is underway right now. And the big goal for phase 2 is to build a new conservatory complex and replace those 1970s era
Oh,
greenhouses with hurricane resistant glass that's really going to protect the living collections in those greenhouses. And they're also going to be much more energy efficient because the thing is, and I hadn't thought about this, but until I talked with staff there, but when you're in a hot climate like that, you got to keep those greenhouses cool, and that
mm-hmm.
requires a lot of energy. But these greenhouses are going to be a lot more efficient. So just kind of building on the foundation of phase 1. And maybe I'm skipping around a little bit, but it seems like a good time to mention that because phase 1 was so successful, raising money for phase 2 was kind of a breeze.
Oh, tell me
And
more.
well, so it was almost all privately funded,
Mm-hmm.
and they had some big donors, but they had buy-in in part because they sold this as a sustainability project and resilience project, and people were just really enchanted with that idea. They wanted to be a part of that. They wanted to be a part of this future vision, and so and the other I think very smart thing about that is once they locked in those donors, they could not go back. Things
Like you made a promise, right?
That's right, and if costs started escalating, well, too bad. This we've already said this is what we're gonna do. And I really credit the leadership of CEO Jennifer Romaniecki and her board for really holding fast to that vision. They were really champions of the vision of Selby Gardens as this model, kind
Mm-hmm.
of leading the way. It's the first botanical gardens complex that's net positive. So that's really quite an accomplishment. And they just want to keep going with phase 2 and phase 3.
That sounds amazing, and also a testament to both vision and action, and how those two can come together to really provide an amazing place and space for the community. Tell me a little more, if you can, about some of the community engagement techniques and tactics. You've mentioned here about fundraising goals and how that gets communicated, but were there some tangible ways that the community could be involved?
Yeah, absolutely. In addition to the capital fundraising campaign that I mentioned, they brought on the solar company really early on, which was also very smart because this was a huge installation, a huge complicated installation, and they really wanted to commit to net positive energy. And so the solar partner really had to be there from the beginning to help guide that vision. And one thing that they did, and it's 180 Solar, I want to call them out directly, they helped create a campaign where donors could adopt a solar panel.
Like adopt a brick? Oh,
Exactly.
I understand that model.
So that way they were really invested in that net positive
Mm-hmm,
vision.
mm-hmm.
And they also did this other thing where they helped separate out the funding of the solar array from the main project,
Mhm.
which helped protect it from being value engineered
I
out.
understand. Okay.
Yeah, so they were really smart to have 180 Solar as this trusted partner. It's a company with a ton of experience, and they are not just an installer. They help develop the project, they help finance the project, they helped monitor the project, and of course, install it. And in this case, they own the project and they're leasing it back to the gardens. which after about 20 years or so,
Mhm.
eventually the gardens will take ownership of it. But this,
Mhm.
again, this was just really creative, out of the box thinking that allowed them to figure out how to finance this thing as costs were escalating. By the way, I should mention that this design and construction was happening during COVID. Yeah, so supply chain costs were going through the
Mhm.
roof. There was a lot of disruption, a lot of having to look at alternative companies when some companies couldn't provide what they needed or went out of business. It was just a very tumultuous time with a lot of escalating costs and a lot of uncertainty,
Mhm.
but they
Mhm.
really persevered through all of that.
Did this project face any resistance?
It did. It did. Despite the fact that they did a lot of community engagement, held a lot of community meetings, and even formed a committee that drew from the community, there was pushback. People were concerned about, again, this was a beloved institution, and anytime change occurs, some people feel threatened. It's just human nature. And so there was that. There's also, fear of development in a place like Sarasota, which is
Mhm.
growing, just fear that a place they know and love is going to be ruined by overdevelopment.
Mhm.
So there was
Mhm.
that. Specifically, people were concerned about the parking structure, which was initially proposed as a 5-story structure with a restaurant on top, a
Oh, wow.
rooftop restaurant, which would have been really cool. You
Right?
could sit up there and eat
Get a
and
beautiful
see the
view of the
bay.
landscape.
Yeah, right. See the gardens and the bay
Mhm.
from
Mhm.
above. People were worried about the noise and the visual impact of
Mhm.
that.
Mhm.
And so, as kind of a final stamp of approval that had to occur before the project could go forward, Sarasota's City Commission had to vote on it. And the design team and the Selby Gardens leadership really thought this was just going to be a rubber stamp moment. So
Mhm.
they were stunned when the City Commission voted the project down. And so they had to go back to the drawing board and address some of these concerns. It's a bit complicated. I don't want to get into the weeds of but
City politics.
suffice it to say, they had to go back to the drawing board and change some things in order to get the design approved. And so in the end, the design was even better than before. One of the major things they did was they reduced the height of the parking structure
Okay.
to 4 stories,
Mhm.
and they moved the restaurant from the rooftop down to ground level. Well, this did a couple things. First of all, it provided more room for solar panels on the
Mhm.
top of the garage.
Mhm.
It reduced the visual impact. It reduced the noise impact from the restaurant because those voices weren't going to be carrying out across the land.
Mm.
Did the restaurant more with the gardens. It also enabled a rooftop garden, which now serves the restaurant with fresh produce
Wow.
grown right there on site. So ultimately, that was an improvement. Another thing that happened in the redesign is they thought long and hard about that welcome center with the
Mhm.
tree-like
Mhm.
structures. Originally, that was conceived as an enclosed, basically glass box. They realized that that's going to be very expensive to build with hurricane resistant, impact resistant glass.
Mm.
It's also going to be hot and they're going to
Right? You
have
have
to
to cool
cool it.
that.
It's like a greenhouse.
Mhm.
So it's also COVID. Do you
Mhm.
really want to be in this
Right?
enclosed space?
Mhm.
So they re
Lots of people mixing in an enclosed
That's
space.
right. Also, intuitively, it kind of didn't make sense to be outside, go inside, buy your ticket, and then go back outside. So
Mhm.
they reconceived it as an open air pavilion. It's more connected to the gardens. It's less shock to your body because you're not going from the
Hot,
outs
cold,
hot to
hot,
cold.
cold.
Yeah.
The
And
glasses fog up.
right, exactly. And so that ended up being better too. There's a couple of other things they did, but those were the 2 major things that changed in the redesign. Everyone I've spoken with on the design team and with Selby Gardens said that it only got better because of that. So sometimes slowing down a little bit and being faced with constraints can result in a better design, even though it's painful. It was very
Right?
painful
Oh, I
for,
understand.
for them to confront that. But in the end, they held more community meetings and they also did some other things to really send a signal that they wanted to do this for the community. They expanded a portion of this multi-use trail that now goes along the edge of the Selby site. And it's a trail that bicyclists and hikers and pedestrians can all use to safely get through the site and
Mm-hmm.
to where they need to go.
Mm-hmm.
They allow people in the neighborhood to use that parking structure during emergencies. So I think during maybe it was Helene or Milton or maybe both, they allowed people to park their cars there. They could
Okay.
be out of the flood
Sure.
zone.
Yeah.
And they, I think too, just by the changes they made, making a more dedicated space for the volunteers, just all sends a signal that, hey, this is a place for you.
Tell me more about that community of volunteers.
There are several hundred of them, as I understand, and some of them, I mean, so if you speak with staff, the botany staff and the horticultural staff, they'll tell you that those volunteers are indispensable to their operations. They collectively log a lot more hours than the staff, I think. Don't quote me on that. I'll have to check it. But they log hundreds of hours every year, and they're vital to every aspect of the garden's operation, from working with groups of kids to tours, to maintaining the living plants out in the gardens, to processing specimens for the herbarium, to even research. So they've even taken some long time dedicated volunteers on expeditions to collect
Oh,
plants.
wow. That seems like so much fun.
Yeah, so in a lot of cases, these are maybe retirees,
Mm-hmm.
people who had a love of horticulture or botany, but did other things in their careers and are now coming back to it after they retire. So it really, like, it's such a win-win, again, like a mutually beneficial relationship where these volunteers have a place where they feel like they belong and the work they do is important. But it also is important.
Mm-hmm.
They're doing a lot of good for the gardens and the operations too.
Now, you were telling me a story about the rooftop garden, and that provides produce for the restaurant. Am I correct?
Yes, that's right. And that is a good story. So that rooftop garden is run by a small nonprofit called Operation Eco Vets. And it's that nonprofit was started by a woman, Camille Van Sant, who herself is a veteran,
Mm-hmm.
and she saw a need to give back to other veterans who were coming back from conflicts overseas and just
Mm-hmm.
really needed a place and maybe needed a boost to help start a business or to think
Mm-hmm.
entrepreneurially. So she had been doing another project in Sarasota that exposed her to gardens and she brought in veterans to work on those gardens. And there was somehow a connection with Selby Garden
Mm-hmm.
staff through that work. And then when they were started thinking about a rooftop garden with this new project, they immediately thought of her, invited her to come and bring some of her. And so they've been at it for, I think, 3 or 4 years now. They grow like hundreds of pounds of tomatoes, mint, fresh flowers, cucumbers, all kinds of produce, flowers, and herbs that are used in the restaurant. And I got to eat at the restaurant a couple times when I
Oh,
visited
I
there.
can imagine.
And
Sounds
the
delicious.
food is gorgeous and it's beautiful. Every single plate is a work of art.
Mm-hmm.
And the environment of the restaurant is really lovely too. You know, it's just a lot of wood, and some of the wood, in fact, comes from the site itself.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah, and actually, that's not true. There is wood from the site used elsewhere in the
Mm-hmm.
project, but there is local and regional wood that's used in the
Mm-hmm.
restaurant. It's a
Mm-hmm.
really beautiful space. You know, it feels really connected to the gardens. It's a biophilic space. And that restaurant is a net positive energy restaurant powered by solar, which was no easy task.
And so not only is it net zero, but by virtue of that, there's no combustion, correct?
No combustion, it's all electric. So induction stoves, electric fryers, all electric. And at the time, that was a harder thing to do. I mean, it was more pioneering, but as the years have gone by, there's just a lot more options now. And so commercial kitchens and chefs are starting to embrace all electric technology. It's also better, like it's not as hot for them. Where I've worked in kitchens before and I know
Mm-hmm.
how hot it gets, but it's a
Mm-hmm.
lot cooler for them. It's a lot healthier than combustion.
With the
Yeah.
off-gassing? Yeah.
So it's a really beautiful model too.
Wow,
Yeah.
that sounds transformative and also like a very amazing case study for electrified kitchens, for local produce, for creating culinary meals from the site itself.
Absolutely. And it was one of the biggest challenges that the design team faced because they knew they were constrained by where they could put solar panels. So they knew how much energy the project was going to be able to produce. And so they had an energy budget. And that restaurant ate up half the
Wow.
energy for all
Mm-hmm.
3 buildings. And so they had to work long and hard to get that energy demand down because they were over budget when they first
Mm-hmm.
started.
Mm-hmm.
And so they worked really closely with the restaurant tour, and they also hired a kitchen consultant,
Okay.
someone who has tons of experience in the industry. And they just did this fine-grained analysis of every single piece of equipment that was going to be used in that kitchen and asked at every turn, can we reduce the sizing of this? Can we switch it out with something that's more
Mm-hmm.
efficient? How can we get that energy use down? And they did.
Do you think that constraint can lead to inspiration?
I absolutely do. I think so. I think constraints, when you think about it, imagine you have a box of 64 crayons.
Mm,
It's almost overwhelming to think, okay, which am I going to use? And if you try to use all of them, what do you end up with? A big mess. But if you only have 6
mhm.
colors, I think often you end up with a better drawing or coloring. I think there is something beautiful about this notion of constraints where you have to be more creative, you have to work with what you have to ask more thoughtful questions, you have to maybe take more time, but I think often you end up with a better result.
And it sounds like those results are proving out there on site, and particularly shown through example of its certifications and data-informed decision making, and being able to show the results of this technical aspect in a natural setting.
Yeah, absolutely. So the project is pedal certified now, which means that they had to fulfill the requirements of at least 3 pedals of Living Building Challenge.
Mm,
One of those pedals had to be either energy, materials, or water. They chose energy. And so they have at least 12 months of data now proving that they've been operating on a net positive basis, producing at 105% of the energy that they consume. Actually, it's more than that. They've been producing more than 105%. So that's pretty incredible. And then I think just the proof is in the pudding with feedback from visitors, volunteers, and the community at large. And the support for phase 2, I think, is a big signal of the success of phase 1.
and it feels like looking into the future there, but it's at our fingertips.
Yeah. And I think this is the way we need to think anymore. I mean, climate change is happening, whether we acknowledge it or not. And so planning for that planning for that resilience is going to be increasingly important. I didn't even talk about some of the things they did there. They have a big stormwater treatment system where they
Mm-hmm.
collect stormwater from all the rooftops of the new buildings, funnel it to an underwater storage tank, and then it's cleaned and filtered by plants on the surface, goes into the storage tank. There's a sand filter there, and then it percolates out into the bay cleaner than it was when it first entered. So that's a way to protect the site from storm surge and also return cleaner water to the bay, which, anytime you have these urban development on these sensitive estuary ecosystems, you have a lot of impact.
So tell me, if you would, about your experience with surprise and delight. Were there any experiences that you had or stories through your research where you had an aha moment, or, hey, that's a really interesting application? Tell me about what that looks like from that sort of paradigm shift that you learned through the strategies employed on site.
Well, I'm going to talk about the parking structure, which is they call the LEAF, the Living Energy Access Facility.
Ooh, nice acronym.
Nice acronym. And it's the most
Mm,
beautiful parking garage I've ever been in.
that's a title in itself,
I know.
right?
So often these structures feel horrible, right? They're
Mhm.
dark, the roof is low, you feel like it's going to close in on you. You have no idea where you parked your car because it all looks alike. But they did some beautiful things with the structure to make it elegant, even beautiful, and and feel welcoming. And so one of the things they did is so simple, really. It was a wayfinding strategy where at each elevator bay they have a different color signifying, which that's not unusual.
Sure.
That's done a lot. But they also have graphics, distinguishing graphics for each level. And each level represents a different part of the forest. So they have the canopy,
Oh, I can see this. Yeah.
understory, and then you have the mid-story. And
Mm-hmm.
so you have these graphics and colors that match with each level of parking. Makes it a lot easier to remember, yeah, I'm on the green level with those pretty plants, or oh yeah, I'm in the canopy. Can't remember which is which now, but it's just a really nice, humane, easy to interpret wayfinding strategy that anybody can use. And so I think that's really important because often if you're arriving by car and you park, that's the first way you're going to experience the
Mm-hmm.
site.
Absolutely.
And so if that's pleasant and not confusing, right away you're going to just be in a better headspace
Mm-hmm.
when you enter the gardens.
Mm-hmm.
And then, of course, to have this structure be festooned with vines and plants just makes it all the more pleasant. These places can feel so inhumane, and this structure does not. It feels welcoming. When you're on the top floor, you can see the underside of the solar canopy, which is
Ooh,
also
yeah.
really cool.
Mm-hmm.
And because they knew that was going to be visible, the solar installer was very careful about how it's all coiled up underneath.
Mm-hmm.
So it's
Mm-hmm.
really attractive when you look up at the underside of that canopy. Little things like that. The structure holding the canopy is actually quite beautiful. The panels cantilever out beyond the top of the
Oh,
building.
wow.
Yeah, and so the cantilevers are created with these tapered steel beams that are quite lovely. And there's one particular view where you can see the underside of the substructure and the bay at the same time.
I can picture some of these beautiful views, and you've even mentioned some of that
Yeah.
territorial view, but I can even see in my mind how that sort of subtle reinforcement of education, art, experience really helps reinforce the message of this place, the importance of this place, and then the necessity of this place.
Absolutely. And I think there is something so important about when you're in a place like that, when you're in a parking structure like that, or you're in the welcome center with these tree-like structures, I think you might start, even if you're not asking them out loud, you might start wondering, well, wait a minute, why does the built environment not look more like this in other places? Just because a parking
Mm,
garage always
mhm,
looks and
mhm,
feels like this
mhm,
ugly,
mhm.
unpleasant thing, does it have to be? Maybe not. And so that's what I hope people get out of it is that they start questioning. Because I think like so many places, so many built spaces feel inhumane to me.
Mm, mhm.
And it's almost like there's this, we just accept that. And I think if people could start questioning, "Well, why is it this way? Why is it that this parking lot doesn't have any place for pedestrians? And instead we have to like dodge cars and fear for our lives on our way into the grocery store. You know, can't
Wow.
we do it differently?"
This is amazing, Juliet. And thank you so very much for spending this time here with me. I really enjoy having read through your work. It's very inspiring. You are a fantastic storyteller, particularly of these places that provide so much inspiration. And so I'm so pleased to have your chat here today. Thank you so much for your time. Great topic. I can clearly see how the Living Museum title of this book fits in directly with this place. At first, I didn't quite make all of the connections until I started to leaf through the pages, pun intended, and really started to understand the story of how this place, even beyond the flora and fauna living around it, is living itself in the building.
Well, thank you for this opportunity. It was really my pleasure and an honor to be able to write about this inspiring and beautiful project. And, just hats off to both the design team and the leadership at Selby Botanical Gardens for seeing this vision through.
I'm so happy to see you here at Living Future 26. I'm very pleased to have continued to meet you here at Living Future, the conference, and the wonderful organization of the Living Future Institute. Thank you to Ecotone. Thank you to Juliet, Marie Selby Gardens, and thank you again for spending this time here with me.
You're welcome. And if I could just give
Please
one or two
do.
more shout outs, I
Please
just
do.
want to thank my editor, Mike Beresford.
Oh, Mike
And
Beresford, yes.
he's the publisher at Ecotone, and none of these projects would happen without him. And I also want to call out Johanna Bjork at Soft Firm, who beautiful graphic design is evident in pretty much every project Ecotone does.
I have plenty and many Ecotone books in my personal library, and I really enjoy these. And it's so important to tell the story of these places. And so while I've thanked you lots here before, I just want to say it again that this is important work. It's important to tell these stories, and you do such a wonderful job at it. And I'm looking forward to the next opportunity to read another book by Juliet. And thank you again so much for joining me here.
Thanks for having me.
And if you'd like to hear more about these types of episodes and conversations with folks like Juliet, please like and subscribe and follow along at Net Podsitive.